Welcome to Myth-Busting Clinical Trials within EoE. Hello, my name is Paula Dunn, and I'm a clinical team manager at PPD, which is also part of Thermofisher. Just a bit of my background is I have a total of 20 years medical research experience with over 15 years experience within the clinical research organisation and pharmaceutical industries combined. 13 years of clinical research experience ranging from phases 1 to 4, and 4 years of preclinical research experience as well, which has also allowed me to work in clinical and academia as well. I've worked in various positions within the industry, ranging from a scientist to a clinical research associate to becoming a project manager, clinical team manager, as well as line manager. I've worked across various therapeutic areas ranging from diabetes, endocrinology, metabolic disorders, and more recently working within EoE in clinical trials. So bringing you here today was a passion of mine to be able to educate you all on clinical trials and how we can bridge the gap.
Hi everyone, my name is Lorna Hastings and I'm an Associate Director in General Medicine and PPD. I have over 20 years experience working in project and clinical management in the clinical trial industry. For the first 10 years of that I was based in the UK, and for the last 10 years I've been based in sunny Perth. I've worked in a variety of indications covering oncology, hematology, general medicine, infection and respiratory diseases, cardiovascular and vaccines. I've been involved in all stages of clinical trials, for the first in human phase 1s through to the large phase 3 trials. I've also experienced in paediatric trials as well. And I have experience in leading clinical trials in all of the regions in the world. So today I want to give you a little bit of an introduction to clinical trials, how they started and how they worked. So this timeline gives you an idea of how clinical trials get from the bench to the patient. And that can be a lengthy and expensive process, and it can last anywhere between 5 and 15 years. It starts with preclinical, where this is done in the lab and involves sometimes animal testings, and those studies can take around 1 year. If the compound shows promise, then they move to phase 1. Phase 1 is done in healthy volunteers, and they're looking at safety of the drug, and they're also looking at efficacy. They're looking to determine what the maximum tolerated dose in humans is going to be. If that shows promise, they move on to phase 2 of clinical trials. And phase 2 is in the population that actually has the disease. And again, they're looking at safety and they're looking at an efficacy profile as well. Does that show some evidence of working? These can take anywhere for a couple of years. And if those results are positive, they move on to phase 3. So phase 3 again is in the population that has the disease, but this is expanded greatly. It's usually a global trial, and it can range up to many tens of thousands or even more, as the case of COVID patients. And this can take anywhere from 2 to 5 years to complete. Once this is complete and the drug is found to be effective and safe by the regulatory authorities, it's then approved and it's permitted for marketing and mass distribution, and it will become available to you from your doctor. But it doesn't stop there. Once the drug is available for general use, we still collect information about that drug over the course of its lifetime, and we're looking for information on safety and efficacy, and we sometimes use phase 4 clinical trials to do that. There are different types of clinical trials, a few I've listed here. So we can have treatment clinical trials. So that's where we have a new drug, a therapy, a device, or a surgery. So it may be a new drug for EoE, or it may be a pacemaker, for example. We have prevention clinical trials, which are used to test to prevent disease. So that might be a medicine, a vaccine, lifestyle changes. We have diagnostic clinical trials for new ways of diagnosing diseases or conditions, such as preeclampsia, for example, in pregnant women. We could have screening clinical trials where we're testing new ways of detecting diseases or conditions, for example, PCR tests. And we may have quality of life clinical trials where we're testing new ways of improving the quality of life for people with chronic illnesses. It may surprise you to learn that the history of clinical trials goes back many hundreds of years. The first recorded observational trial was done in 1747, and this was with James Lind, who observed that a diet of vitamin C prevented scurvy in sailors. Then the first placebo study took place in 1863 by Austin Flint, where he treated 13 patients suffering from rheumatism with a herbal extract instead of the established remedy. The first clinical trial that we would recognise today was a first randomised controlled trial of streptomycin and pulmonary tuberculosis, and that was carried out in 1946 by the MRC of the UK. At the Nuremberg trials after World War II, it was discovered that the Nazi regime were performing human experimentation without consent. In order that that never happens again, the global community put in place a number of legislations and guidelines to protect human people. You may have heard of the Nuremberg Code of 1947. It looks at establishing voluntary consent for clinical trials. The Declaration of Helsinki in 1964 gave specific recommendations on the use of human subjects. And the International Conference on Harmonisation Good Clinical Practice Guidelines in 1996 established an international and ethical quality standard, and that encompasses protections for minor and vulnerable patients. Today, the worldwide clinical trial industry is heavily regulated by law, and the Australian clinical trial industry is no different. In Australia, there's various legislations and guidelines that are needed to be adhered to, and I'll go through some of the most important ones just now. So every clinical trial involving the use of unapproved therapeutic goods, whether that's drugs, medical devices and biologics, are subject to a number of national laws and regulations. In Australia, the regulatory agency is the Therapeutic Goods Administration, the TGA, which is part of the Australian Government's Department of Health. Its role is to carry out a range of assessments and monitoring activities to ensure therapeutic goods that are available in Australia are of an acceptable standard, and that the Australian community has access to therapeutic advancements in a reasonable time. The TGA uses its own medical officers, but it also seeks the advice and opinion of other scientists, pharmacists, other qualified and independent experts and advisory committees to assess each clinical trial. The Therapeutic Goods Act 1989 and Regulations 1990 set out the legal requirements relating to quality, safety and efficacy of therapeutic goods. The TGA website, www.tga.gov.au, is a very useful website for learning more about regulations in Australia. The clinical trial industry also adheres to guidelines for good clinical practice, which is an internationally accepted standard for the designing, conducting, recording and reporting of clinical trials. And this guideline is supplemented by some specific local regulatory requirements in Australia. All clinical trials have to have a positive opinion by an independent Human Research Ethics Committee, known in Australia as an HREC. These are governed by the National Statement on Ethical Conduct in Human Research 2007, which is a series of guidelines made in accordance with the Australian National Health and Medical Research Council Act in 1992. And they are applicable to any researcher conducting research with human participants, any member of an ethical review board reviewing that research, or anyone that's involved in research governance and potential research participants. The Australian Code for Responsible Conduct of Research 2018 is a guide that documents the broad principle and responsibilities that underpin the research done in Australia. This was developed jointly by the National Health and Research Council and Universities Australia. Adherence to the 2018 Code is a prerequisite for receipt of any funding by the National Health and Medical Research Council. Subjects' data privacy is protected under the Privacy Act 1988. This is the principal piece of Australian legislation protecting the handling of personal information about individuals. Some clinical trials will also be subject to further special legislations or guidance, such as the Embryo Research Licensing Legislation, Gene Technology Act 2000, Office of the Gene Technology Regulator, and their specific consent and guardianship laws in Australia. So this is a brief summary of regulations of clinical trials being run in Australia. I hope it emphasised the highly regulated and controlled environments in which clinical trials are run. If you have any concerns, I would encourage you to review the TGA website or utilise some of the links provided at the end of the call or discuss your concerns with your medical team. So I'll pass you over to Paula now, who's going into a little bit more detail about clinical trials.
Okay, thank you, Lorna, for the previous slides and information. It was very informative. So, why should I participate in a clinical trial? The following slides will take a look into our perceptions about clinical trials. We're going to look at the risks, we're going to look at the benefits of participating, and also how do you make the right decision for yourself when it comes to participating in a clinical trial. So, with clinical trials being such a mixed bag of triumphs and tragedies, it makes sense that we can be fearful of participating in a clinical trial. We all have certain perceptions about what clinical trials mean to us. So can you relate to any of these common fears, such as feeling like a guinea pig or treated like a number, not a person? Fear of pharmaceutical companies that only care about the bottom line. Fear that the drugs are not tested properly. You're worried about the treatment might make your condition worse or add to your pre-existing conditions. There might also be a fear that the treatment might not even work at all. Worst case scenario, there might be a fear of death. It could also be a fear about you being placed in a placebo arm if your clinical trial contains placebo. So you might be thinking your time and effort is for nothing. Maybe you've tried everything under the sun and nothing works. So why would this be any different? Maybe you're thinking there's more frequent trips to the doctor and medical procedures. So maybe it might become more of a burden than a benefit. You know, these are all valid concerns that you have, and you are totally justified in feeling this way. So, what are the risks in clinical trials? Well, true, there are always risks to participating in a clinical trial. After all, it is an experimental drug, device, or procedure, and there may be side effects that we are still discovering all the time. There may even be unwanted events that may occur or may not be related to the study drug or procedure being studied. But true, the treatment may not even work and your condition may not even improve or get worse. But, you know, there's also some great benefits participating in a clinical trial too. You get the opportunity to be one of the first people in the world to try the new state-of-the-art advancements in EoE therapy before it is widely available. Through your participation, you have a voice in providing updates to how the drug benefits you through the medical tests and procedures, as well as the various questionnaires that you will be completing to add to the knowledge on how to better treat your condition. You get to receive regular and frequent free medical treatment and expert medical care that comes along with being in a trial. The treatment sometimes even becomes better than the current standard of care. So, for you, the standard of care may be of many off-label products you're using to minimize your symptoms for EoE. But then there's this new drug becomes more powerful in improving your symptoms or even reducing what's causing the flare-ups. If you're the type of person that loves to give back to the community, then you also get to contribute to medical research and advancing the knowledge of EoE, and you get to help improve the quality of life for yourself and for others with your disease. So now we've looked at the common fears, the risks and benefits of participating in a clinical trial. But how do you decide on what's right for you? Before you take any form of experimental treatment, which is a drug or device or procedure, you must be informed by your doctor about all the risks and all the benefits of participating in a clinical trial. Your doctor should provide you a written document detailing all the risks and benefits of participating in a trial, and this document comes in the form of what we call informed consent. So, what is informed consent and what does it mean? Well, generally what happens is that if your GI is participating in a clinical trial, they may inform you verbally about a trial because they've assessed your disease and feel that you are right fit for the group of people being tested. Once your GI has verbally explained the trial to you, they should give you some more information to take home with you to decide whether this is right for you and your current circumstances. You may be contacted by one of your GI's member of staff. This is generally a study nurse, which will walk you through the document for your understanding and give you time to ask your questions. The informed consent should be written in a way that is easily understood by you and your family, so not too many complicated medical terms. It should also contain all the risks, all the benefits, you and your GI's obligations on the trial. It should also contain the time commitment needed, as well as what procedures will be performed and how often. The informed consent is not a binding contract, which means that both you and your GI, if at any time need to withdraw you from the study, you can do so without fear of negative consequences to your future treatment. And if at the end of the day, after reading the informed consent and discussing your options with your doctor and your family, and you decide that you do not wish to participate, your ongoing treatment should not be impacted if you say no. So the next set of slides are going to be looking at some common questions that Sarah Gray was happily provided to us to be able to minimise any misunderstandings or communications about clinical research, clinical trials, and the impact of EoE. So one of the questions that was asked by your subscribers is, why can't my child have the adult drug for EoE treatment? Well, that is a very good question. You may have noticed that many clinical trials are always tested in adults. So you may be wondering, why can't you give the same drug to your child? Children's bodies are still developing, and the medicines and vaccines used to treat adults may not affect children in the same way that they affect adults. Therefore, specifically designed clinical trials for children need to be conducted to test whether the dose and the way it works on the body is similar to those of adults. So drug companies need to know as much information about the drug and its effects on the body before dosing children, as it could impact their growth and development long term, and that's something we don't want to risk. So another frustrating thing you may have noticed is, why don't I meet the criteria to participate in a clinical trial, but I can easily access off-label treatment? Well, this is a good question as well. Let's define what off-label means. The TGA has not approved using a drug that was not approved for your indication or patient group. So it doesn't mean that the TGA has rejected the indication. So that's why there is a market for prescribing off-label. And you generally see them in children, pregnant women, or for those in palliative care. For example, you may be using an off-label drug to help you alleviate some of your EoE symptoms. Sometimes your prescriber can find supportive evidence in the Australian Medicines Handbook, which is the prescribing Bible for medical practitioners, as you can see here on the screen. There is no legal impediment to prescribing off-label, but the risk lies on the prescriber and the consumer. The bottom line is, always check with your healthcare provider if you have any questions about off-label prescribing. So you might be wondering why you're not eligible for a particular clinical trial. Clinical trials have very strict inclusion and exclusion criteria, which means that these criteria must be met by all patients that participate. There are many factors behind the rationale to the inclusion and exclusion criteria of the trial, and they include, and not limited to, not allowing access to any patient who is not eligible. By minimising ambiguity of the patients that are selected, this keeps patients safe and also keeps the scientific integrity of the trial. We want to be able to compare apples with apples. So when the data is collected and analysed for safety and effectiveness of the drug, we actually have some really good statistical data. Sometimes patients are excluded if they have other diseases that may affect the effectiveness of the therapy being evaluated and therefore skew outcomes. So a good example could be that the drug that's being tested may be metabolized or excreted predominantly through the kidneys. So they will exclude patients with poor kidney function because their bodies will not tolerate the drug taken and may impact patient safety and also its effectiveness. Or there could be another unknown health risk factor with other diseases that would make them worse. So in relation to EoE, some trials require newly diagnosed EoE patients only as they want to see the effect of their drug on patients who have not had other forms of treatment that might interact or affect the result. There could also be other reasons why you are not eligible to participate in the trial. But the bottom line is your medical team should be able to explain why you don't meet the criteria for any trials you are considering in participating. And hopefully the next one will be right for you. Another common question that was raised was, what is a placebo and what does it mean? You may have heard placebo termed as the sugar pill. Well, in undertaking clinical trial, researchers don't want to leave anything to chance. So they want to be as certain as possible that the results of the testing show whether or not the treatment is safe and effective. So the gold standard for testing drugs in people is the randomized placebo-controlled clinical trial. That means volunteers are randomly assigned. So it's like a flip of a coin, okay, that is selected by chance to either a test group receiving the experimental drug or a control group receiving the placebo, or in oncology trials, for example, they will receive the standard of care. A placebo is an inactive substance that looks exactly the same as the drug or treatment being tested. So comparing results from the two groups suggests whether changes in the test group results from the treatment or whether it occurs by chance. So in many trials, no one, not even the research team, knows who gets the treatment, the placebo, or another intervention. When participants, family members, and staff are blind to the treatment while the study is underway, the study is called a double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial. It's a lot to wrap your head around. So many of you asked, but what if I don't want a placebo? Do I have a choice? Well, in short, the answer is no. In most trials, no one, not even your doctors, know who is getting the active drug or the placebo. We want to eliminate any bias for or against the study drug being tested that the doctor, the patient, and the drug company has when conducting the trial. Placebos are also used to ensure that the results obtained is strong and to eliminate any psychosocial effects, which I'll discuss in the next slide. So placebos will not harm you. The Declaration of Helsinki states, where for compelling and scientifically sound methodological reasons, the use of placebo is necessary to determine the efficacy or safety of an intervention, and the patients who receive placebo or no treatment will not be subject to any risk of serious or irreversible harm. So some trials are designed to allow and open stage or open label, where patients are told which study arm they are on and given active drug. Again, always talk with your medical team about trial design if you are worried about placebos and their impact on your current disease. Researchers have known since the 1940s that there can be psychological tampering when a patient is given a drug to test for effectiveness. They found that 1 out of 3 people are placebo responders, which means a patient may consciously or unconsciously feel therapeutically better when given a pill or injection. So to minimize the placebo effect in clinical trials, everyone is blinded. So that is, no one knows whether the active or placebo drug is given. So currently, a lot of research is focusing on biologics as the wonder drug for EoE sufferers. However, the route of administration is via injections or intravenous infusions, which to some patients cannot be ideal. Research suggests that about 40% of children worldwide under the age of 12 and 20% of adolescents have a fear-driven physical or emotional response to needles, and potentially adults as well. Unfortunately, unpleasant procedures are sometimes needed to get all the scientific data that we need. Some techniques to minimize painful experience can be as follows. You can use various distraction techniques, such as having your child watch cartoons or play with an iPhone. Maybe there are devices to use in clinical trials, such as Buzzy or similar devices as seen in the picture in front of you. Potentially, there's options for counselling or hypnotherapy or other forms of treatment like that to aid with needle desensitization. At the end of the day, if you're considering, or you or your child considering participating in a clinical trial, always talk to your study team to learn about the options that can be used to minimize any needle phobias. When companies are designing trials for new medications, they often prefer to study patients who have not previously been treated for the specific disease they are looking at. And I guess this can be frustrating for those that have been suffering from EoE for quite a long time. So if the subject in the trial has been previously treated and they haven't responded or improved, they aren't studying exactly the same thing as a naive or basically untreated group. Effectively, the trial then is studying a specific group that has not improved with the current care or has had side effects of treatment. But either way, the disease has changed. Some drug companies are studying first-line drugs that are relatively safe in general, but there are certainly companies who have started to enroll subjects who have already tried off-label therapy. The next question is, why can't my GI participate in a clinical trial? Well, many practicing clinicians, such as gastroenterologists, who see patients with EoE, do not have their practice set up to participate in research as such. So, participating in research requires various resources and regulatory checks in order for us to ensure that the GIs that are participating in clinical trials, again, like I said earlier, we're comparing apples with apples. So we need to ensure that the investigator has the right qualifications, has the right personnel to be able to assist him in working on the trial and also keeping you safe, having the right facilities and to perform the procedures. And again, it's all about patient safety. And and again, a lot of these things may not be part of a GI standard practice. Clinical trials are highly regulated, which means that the doctors that participate in the trial are also vetted for their experience, their expertise, and they're willing and able to run the trial within their clinics. There is a lot of background work invested in selecting sites to participate in a trial, as there is a lot of labour-intensive hours that the GI and his staff need to follow in order to successfully trial the new study drug. So responsibilities include the GI having adequate oversight of the trial. So he needs to make sure that he is keeping a review of what's going on at all times. He needs to ensure that he's got site staff and his patients a really great oversight. The other thing is reporting expectations and timelines for any side effects, whether it's related to study drug or not. The safety of the patient is the number one focus here. And obviously, experience running a clinical trial is different from running a clinical practice. So these are some of the things as to why potentially your GI is not participating in a clinical trial. So what does the future of clinical trials hold for all of us? It's quite an exciting time that we're in. Well, the way we do clinical research is changing and evolving. There is an increase in understanding the patient journey. That is, getting into your shoes, not only medically, but also holistically, and how your illness impacts every facet of your life. To treat you more than just a disease, but as a human being who has wants, needs, aspirations, and improve your quality of life so you can live your best life. Clinical trials are undergoing new ways to redesign the way they run their protocols. The idea is with patient collaboration. So how we're doing this is not only partnering with your GI or medical specialist, but also with patient advocacy groups like EoE Inc. It is a multidisciplinary way to ensure we are reaching the right patients at the right time and getting the right treatment out there to you as quickly as possible. As you can see, it's not an us versus you approach, but more of a we. So this comes to the end of our educational session today. I hope you did find it very interesting and insightful. And I'd like to thank Sarah Gray for allowing us and giving us the platform and the space to provide this educational seminar to you all. Also, I'd like to thank Lorna Hastings for her participation today. And as Lorna mentioned earlier, here are some of the resource links that you can, if you'd like to learn more about clinical trials, in particular, all the regulations that we need to follow when we're working with patients like yourselves, please feel free to have a look. So from me to you, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.